Well, hello again, and everyone, welcome to the next edition of our Ask the Experts live webinar series. Tonight's topic is celiac disease, food allergies, and intolerances, key differences, and dining out strategies. My name is Chris Rich. I am the CEO and Executive Director of the National Celiac Association. Thanks for taking the time to join us this evening. NCA educates, advocates, and empowers individuals, families, and communities affected by celiac disease and non-celiac gluten sensitivities. We have an extensive support network from coast to coast, and that includes our Raising Our Celiac Kids rock program, as well as other initiatives such as our supporting our celiac seniors and feeding gluten free, which has delivered gluten free food to food pantries in over 3,000 communities across the United States. You can find more information about these programs and what we do at our website at nationalceliac.org. I would like to thank the sponsor for tonight's event, Pamela's Products. Known for their gluten-free baking mixes, their cookies and snack bars. You can find more information about our sponsor at pamelasproducts.com. So some housekeeping items before we get started. This is an educational webinar series. It is supposed to provide a intimate and casual conversation with some of the top professionals in their field of expertise. This is a complimentary piece. We do have a Q&A section on our website, also called Ask the Experts. You can go by the Q&A up at the resources that drops down from the top screen. And if your question tonight, I know a lot of people have filled out some great questions and sent them in during registration. There's also opportunity for you to ask questions during the course of this event. If it does not get addressed this evening, make sure you go to that Ask the Experts page at nationalceliac.org/Q&A, and you can find answers to many questions there. Some other things. Tonight is going to be it's a short presentation from our guest speakers, followed by discussion. Like I said, you can go to the Q&A box at the bottom corner or in the toolbar of your Zoom. That's where you can click in that feature, and that's where you can type your question. Please note that there's no information that is intended for diagnosis or treatment of any medical condition. Any questions that are asked that are specific to medical conditions will not be addressed. But please, we do recommend that you talk to your health provider with any questions that you may have regarding your personal health. Also know that this webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing on our website at nationalceliac.org. It's also going to come to you, a link to the webinar itself, the recording will come to you in an email here in about 7 to 10 days. That'll be a follow-up and it'll be sent to where your email address that you used for registration. Closed captioning is also available. Also in that toolbar, you can click that CC button. So I'm going to go ahead and get started by introducing our presenters for tonight's webinar. Our first expert is Tiffany Leon. Tiffany is FAIR's Assistant Director of Training and Professional Programs. She supports development of educational materials and training programs for key target audiences, including registered dietitians and other healthcare professionals, commercial food service operators, and those with food allergies. She came to FAIR from a college campus where she worked in dining services to help the students with dietary restrictions navigate their dining options. She's also served as a voice for students during menu development and provided food safety training to campus dining staff. Prior to her work also at FAIR, she was a private nutrition and research firm that she worked with that tailored holistic nutrition programs to boost physical and mental performance. Joining Tiffany tonight will be Carla Carter. Carla is the Director of Education and Programs for the National Celiac Association. Carla became involved as a volunteer with NCA in 2006, I should say, as a member of our advisory board. She became a staff member in 2017. Her degree and clinical experience in occupational therapy gives her a unique perspective in working with support groups as well as helping to create and contribute to educational content. So without further ado, I am going to hand it off to Tiffany. This is a really hot button topic, so I'm excited to hear from her. So Tiffany, you can go ahead and I will stop sharing and you can share your screen.
Wonderful. We'll get my slides up here and we can get started. Thank you so much for the introduction, Chris, and thank you for having me. Celiac disease, food allergies, and intolerances, they're often confused for each other, yet they differ significantly in diagnosis and health impact especially following a reaction. So Carla and I will, provide a broad overview of some of the key distinctions between these conditions, and then we'll launch into some strategies for dining safely outside the home, because some of these may overlap. Carla and I are just going to have a fun time talking through these. But first, we're going to talk about some of the key differences. So Food allergy is a very serious condition. There are 1 in 10 US adults that have food allergy and 1 in 13 children. Now, if you put this together, we're looking at like 33 million Americans that are managing a food allergy. If you count the family members, caregivers, others in the household that are affected by food allergy, that number can climb to about 85 million. So we're talking about a big portion of those living in the U.S. And about half of adults with food allergies have had anaphylaxis. And we're seeing the same thing in children. Roughly 40% of children have had a very serious reaction. And about more than half, 6 in 10, or 3 in 4, are experiencing this fear, this anxiety that they're going to have a reaction. So the individuals are getting diagnosed with food allergies, they're managing food allergies, and we're seeing this psychosocial aspect of food allergies, this burden of management that can really affect things throughout. So, a food allergy is when a person is exposed to a food allergen and their body develops these antibodies to the components in the food. Now, most of the time, these are proteins, and we're not going to go into alpha-gal today, but that is where individuals are allergic to a sugar found in mammalian meat. So, typically, it's proteins. But normally, the components in foods are harmless. But in the case of a food allergy, the person's body mistakes this as a threat. Now, those bodies then bind to cells in those antibodies, those IgE antibodies, then bind to cells in the body called mast cells. And then the next time the body is exposed to those allergens, the antibodies jump into action and release several chemicals, including histamine. So there's this whole cascade of a reaction. And when those chemicals are released, that's when you'll start to see the outward signs of food allergies. And we'll go into signs and symptoms in a minute. Food allergy reactions can be life-threatening. A past reaction does not predict a future reaction. And I should say here, we wanted to note here that while food allergy is typically diagnosed in infancy or childhood, it can develop at any age. So we are seeing a large portion of adults who've never had a food allergy before have this adult onset of food allergy. So they've eaten lobster their whole life, they've had shrimp their whole life, they've had wheat their whole life, and suddenly they're having these serious reactions or having these hives or swelling of the tongue or lips or having a reaction even in adulthood. So food allergy can start at any age. Now, when we're talking about the common food allergens in the US, we're looking at 9 foods or 9 food groups. So here on the slide, you see peanuts, tree nuts, milk, egg, wheat, soy, fish, shellfish, and sesame. Now, some of these are standalone foods like sesame, but then there are some of these that are groups. So tree nuts, fish, shellfish. And I just wanted to note here that you can be allergic to multiple tree nuts. You could be allergic to cashew and pistachio. You could be allergic to walnut and pecan and almonds, but you could also only be allergic to one of those tree nuts. So you have some individuals that are avoiding tree nuts as an entire group or multiple tree nuts in that group. But you could also be allergic to only one. Same thing with fish, same thing with shellfish. You could only be allergic to shrimp. So I just wanted to point that out here because we say the 9 most common food allergens, but 3 of these are actually food groups that can span a lot of different foods here. But 90%, as I said, of food allergens in the US are made up of these or are accounted for using these foods or food groups. However, you can be allergic to things outside the top 9, like mustard or strawberries or sumac or cantaloupe. Um, so I just wanted to point out the common ones. However, food allergies can extend to, virtually any food. And there have been, I think, 170 foods that have been documented um, as food allergens. So how is a food allergy diagnosed? And you'll see here we have a skin prick test and we have a blood test. And the photo here is highlighting a skin prick test. So a drop of liquid is put on your arm, is put on your back. Contains the allergen. And then the medical staff, since this is all done, in a medical setting, the medical staff nurse likely will prick or scratch your skin, and then see if a reaction occurs. So it may be a raised, itchy red bump. This is typically called a wheal. The nurse will then measure the wheal. The larger the wheal, the more likely you are to be allergic to this food. If there are no reaction, we can pretty confidently say that you are not allergic to that food. However, there can be some false positives with the skin prick test and the blood test, and I'll talk about that in a second. But the blood test detects those antibodies. Remember, we were talking about those antibodies that result as the food is introduced into the body. So it can detect antibodies in your blood to certain foods. Um, and blood tests can be used alongside other tests to help make a diagnosis. But because there can be false positives for the blood test or skin test, we want to be very careful here. Because these tests can show positives, can be positive for things, it may just show that you are sensitive to certain foods. If someone is eating the food, let's say they're having, a peanut butter sandwich every Saturday when they're at their grandma's house and they come in for the blood test and they're showing a positive sign for peanut on this test, but they are eating the food without any issues, then they are not allergic to that food. So we just want to make sure that I'm highlighting these tests here, but these really should only be done in a controlled setting after after a comprehensive medical diet history has been taken to kind of narrow down what an individual may be allergic to. And we don't want to be running these like large panel tests to try and find out what someone is allergic to. So hopefully that's not confusing. But I do want to mention that these tests are available, but it's only one part of the diagnosis because of these false positives. And so the gold standard of a food allergy diagnosis really is the oral food challenge. So the oral food challenge, under medical supervision, the individual has very, very small amounts of the allergen and an increase in dose over a couple of hours. The medical team then observes to make sure that uh, there is not a reaction happening, or if there is a reaction happening, then treatment is provided. The test is obviously stopped. Now, sometimes oral food challenge can also be ordered if we think that someone may be outgrowing a food allergy. So maybe they had their blood test done and some of their numbers are going down. Then they may do an oral food challenge to see if they actually eat the food. What happens? Are they able to safely consume the food? So it can be done for diagnosis, but also to see if the individual has outgrown the food. So there's no cure for food allergy. Right now, the only treatment is to avoid a reaction. And like in celiac disease, to prevent a reaction, we have to avoid the problem food. And here it is the allergen. So need to read food labels before you eat or buy the food, learning how to prepare and store the food safely, and of course, sharing information about your allergy when dining out and traveling. And we'll get into that in a second. But, from the initial diagnosis, through the entire life cycle, we want to make sure that we are doing all of these things so that we can avoid the problem food to avoid a reaction. Now, if a reaction does occur, epinephrine is the only medicine that can treat a life-threatening reaction, and it must be used right away. There are there it can be Any delays in administering epinephrine can result in a potential fatality. It does raise the risk when it is delayed. So we always say at FAIR, epi first, epi fast. We want to make sure that it is delivered. So individuals with food allergies would be prescribed epinephrine. You may see these auto injectors. You may see the new nasal epinephrine spray. But epi first, epi fast, and then initiate 911. So just so we know what we're talking about when we're talking about a food allergy reaction, multiple systems of the body can be affected, pretty much every system of the body, in fact. A lot of times you will see um, the reaction start in and around the mouth because that's likely where the ingestion occurred. Likely someone ate the food. So itchy mouth, swelling of the tongue or lips, maybe excessive sneezing or dry cough. Many times the skin may be affected, so hives, rash turning red, or even turning blue in color. So the skin may be involved. There may be some gastrointestinal involvement, such as vomiting, excessive vomiting, or diarrhea, stomach pain. So the GI system can be involved. But we also may see these big organ systems like cardiovascular system or the respiratory system. This is when these life-threatening reactions are occurring when we're having trouble breathing, when we have low blood pressure, fainting, passing out, weak pulse. And some in our community even describe this sense of impending doom. Like they take a bite of the brownie and they know that something is wrong. They know that something bad is happening. So this change in mood, this change in alertness. So this emotional response. So anaphylaxis can be one or more of these major systems involved, or it could be multiple, more mild-like symptoms with two organ systems that are involved. But when you suspect an allergic reaction, life-threatening allergic reaction, epinephrine is the only thing that can stop a reaction. And I'm going to bring Carla on here to talk a little bit about celiac disease. I know many that are listening in on the webinar may be managing this for themselves or for a family member, but we just kind of wanted to set the stage to make sure we were all on the same page. So, Carla, you want to talk about celiac disease?
Sure. Thank you so much, Tiffany. Let me just make sure the view is changing for everybody. Can everybody see me, or are you guys still seeing Tiffany? Tiffany, can you see
I
me?
can see you. Yeah.
Okay, great.
I see you,
Okay.
Carla. I see you. And when you talk, the green's around you. You're good.
Perfect. Okay. So celiac disease, like Tiffany said, a lot of people are here tonight who have celiac disease. And this is only just a couple of slides um, because we have a much more comprehensive webinar about understanding the full breadth of celiac disease diagnosis and management. But just to cover our bases, celiac disease is a genetic disease. It's autoimmune in nature. So autoimmune means the body attacks itself, and it reacts abnormally to gluten. It doesn't recognize gluten. It thinks it's a foreign invader. And this reaction happens in the lining of the small intestine. So when someone with celiac disease ingests gluten, the villi on that lining becomes damaged and people are unable to absorb nutrients properly, which can lead to a host of deficiencies and serious health complications, as many of you know. So, next slide. And diagnosing celiac disease, you do need to be consuming gluten to get accurate testing. And so first is a blood test. You should talk with your doctor about your full medical history, and they should do a lot of intake and information, and they are going to check your blood for antibodies that are specific to celiac disease, and that is tissue transglutaminase and a total IgA. Tissue TTG is a subset of IgA, immunoglobulin A antibody. And so you do need to test for a total IgA because some people are deficient in that, which can throw off the TTG reading. If that blood test is positive, they're going to move on to do an endoscopy, and that's usually done with the gastroenterologist. And what they do is stick a camera down your throat and they take a look at everything. This is the gold standard for diagnosing celiac disease in the United States. And they're looking for inflammation and damage, and then they're going to take some small biopsies or little samples of the intestinal lining, the small intestinal lining, most importantly, the duodenal bulb. So, yeah, and some doctors go through different things. Some people, they're really suspicious about celiac disease if they're testing for the genetics, which you cannot use to diagnose celiac disease, just to paint part of the picture of a person's clinical health. And so if your blood testing is questionable or not as positive, some doctors might still want to move forward with the endoscopy to check things out for your general health or check celiac testing.
And that's such an important nuance, what you said, uh, kind of in the middle there, but you do need to be eating gluten when you are having the celiac testing done because you want to be able to show the damage, the damaged lining of the small intestine, which is different. This is different than food allergy testing. If you suspect you have a food allergy, while you're undergoing the diagnostic piece of that, they're still going to say to avoid it because we wouldn't want you to be having a reaction while they're trying to figure it out. So this is an interesting or it's important nuance to mention there.
Yeah, very interesting point. And the other piece is you can have celiac disease and food allergies. So you don't, we won't talk about wheat allergy right now, but like celiac disease as an autoimmune disease, I personally have multiple allergies as well to nuts. So, all right, Tiffany, I'll let you take it back over.
Yes, having one doesn't mean that you can't have the other, that you can have them at the same time. Yes, that's also important to mention. And then the third adverse reaction that we're going to discuss here is food intolerances. So food intolerances or food allergy is not an intolerance or a sensitivity. Intolerance and sensitivities do not cause your immune system to overreact. So just like Carla was describing how celiac is an autoimmune disease where the body is attacking itself. In the case of food allergies, your immune system is responding to something that is put into your body. But for intolerances and sensitivities, they're typically involving the digestive system. They're not life-threatening. A lot of times these are self-diagnosed. There is a hydrogen breath test that could be ordered by physicians to diagnose lactose intolerance. But really, the best example of an intolerance is lactose intolerance. And lactose is just a really big sugar molecule found in milk. And if you have a lactose intolerance, it may be because your body is not making enough of the enzyme, or you don't make it at all. You don't have this lactase enzyme to break down this milk sugar. And so your body just can't digest this big molecule, and so it causes uncomfortable feeling in your intestines, in your GI tract while it's working its way through. It is not your immune system responding. And we're going to talk about this overlap in lactose intolerance and celiac disease because damage of the lining of the small intestine can lead to the body's inability to produce this enzyme called lactase. So we talked about the damage of the microvilli in the small intestines, and yes, I'm doing my finger-like projections here. Um, but when these microvilli are damaged, um, we talked about these micronutrient deficiencies that can happen. And when it is damaged, it's not producing this enzyme. Once a celiac, um, once celiac disease is diagnosed and the individual is following a gluten-free diet and the intestines can heal properly, some individuals are able to produce this enzyme again to break down lactose and tolerate dairy foods again. So it may be this transient lactose intolerance during this diagnostic period when when the individual is still consuming gluten in their diet, and therefore damaging their small intestine. So, Carla, anything to add on that?
No, I think you got it. Yeah, that lactase enzyme is right on the tip of the villi. So, as clinicians in the field say, it's the first to go and the last to come back. So, and hopefully for a lot of you, you've been able to take those lactate pills until then, and then eventually wean off of those lactate pills enough to digest dairy on your own. And if not, that's okay. There's lactate pills for this particular intolerance.
Yeah, and I guess if you use that first to go, last to come back, it could be a good marker to show that your small intestine is healing, if you are able to tolerate lactose again. So hopefully that's a good sign.
Yeah.
And then for food intolerances and sensitivity tests, we see a lot of these on the market. A lot of these are measuring IgG. IgG is a memory marker, memory antibody. So if you went to a barbecue and you had a burger and corn on the cob and watermelon, and then you're like, wow, like I really need to take this test. Like I'm not feeling well. Enough is enough. You take this over-the-counter sensitivity test, and it shows you're sensitive to corn, you're sensitive to watermelon, you're sensitive to beef and wheat. It may be because you recently had these in your diet. So we just want to make sure to remind everyone that over-the-counter sensitivity tests are not validated ways to diagnose food allergies or intolerances, and just be very, very careful because if you do end up using these tests and then you take all these foods out of your diet, you're going to be over restricting yourself. It can cause a lot of, a lot of anxiety, a lot of burden, and you could be missing out on all these micro macronutrients. So for nothing. So if you're ever worried about it or nervous about it or suspect it, see a healthcare professional. Carla, I see you back on. What you want to chime
Yes,
in?
absolutely no. And just you mentioned IgG, and that's something where I probably want to maybe just say where food allergies and how they differ in the immune system. And we say they're different parts of the immune system. Typically, allergies are IgE, correct?
Yep.
And then I was mentioning IgA for celiac disease with that
hmm
autoimmune piece, and the IgG testing is a naturally occurring thing that happens when you eat something, right?
Yep.
Did I get that right?
Yep. Yes.
That's so confusing and not, something that we all need to know all the time, but if we're talking about the differences and similarities, that can also help some people conceptualize.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that the tests are measuring something, but it's not necessarily something that's giving you the best information to make dietary restriction decisions. So,
Yeah, there are no biological markers that they are aware of to
yeah.
date for
So
for
just
food sensitivity. Sorry, I'll
right.
go offline now.
Right. Yeah, so we're going to move into some key similarities as we start to move into how we manage life with dietary restrictions, these adverse food reactions. And it's super important, from the get-go, from diagnosis, to learn how to access safe foods, medication, medical care. And this is whether you're diagnosed with celiac disease or food allergies. We want to make sure you have access to safe foods and the care needed to manage the conditions. Learning to handle negative comments from family, friends, coworkers. The first your first date. I know Valentine's Day just happened, so someone in just learning how to navigate these negative comments. Teaching others about safe, teaching yourself first about safe foods and labels and symptoms and how to help you following a reaction, but teaching others as well along the way. Um, we we have found that, or a study has shown that about 95%, that's almost 100% of teens with food allergy are experiencing worry, at least sometimes, and may have near constant anxiety. So talking about all these things, safe food, medication, medical care, and all of this can weigh very heavy on the individual with food allergies, and in this case, especially teens. And Carla, I don't know if you want to address this question that came in, but I did make a note here. Um, what do we say to those who avoid gluten simply because it's inflammatory or it's just not good for you? The mindset, lessens the understanding and the necessity of a strict gluten-free diet as we're trying to navigate these negative comments from family and friends. Like anything for the listeners here.
Yeah, so I think being There's a couple things you can do, and every situation and interaction is probably going to be different based on the individual you're speaking to, because with family dynamics, there's a lot of relationships and things you need to manage and ways you need to talk to people and handle people. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you have to do what's right by you. If there's an opportunity for education about your allergy or your disease process, specifically for celiac disease, if there's an opportunity to educate, I always say take it and educate in the most polite way possible. Um, and then, someone recently said, oh, that's great for you. If you think that's working for you, that's great for you. And ultimately, it's about what you can control. And, I have to do this because it's like poison to me, or however you're comfortable explaining it, or not at all. You can just say, "Oh, that's great for you. Have a great day," or change the subject, or yeah. So sometimes that can help.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think in the food allergy community, we would feel very similarly in that you want to there are a lot of people avoiding different foods for a variety of different reasons. Every time you go on social media, every time you go on the internet, there's something new that people should be avoiding. Um, yeah, and then for someone who has a true food allergy or someone who's truly diagnosed with celiac disease, it can be very hard for them to navigate this. So, thank you for sharing that. So the next, we talked about testing, which can be a little bit confusing, but we also wanted to take a few minutes to talk about allergen labeling, and we'll talk about gluten labeling in a second. But for food allergies, by law, food companies must have food labels that clearly state whether any of those nine most common allergens are in a product. So think back to those nine common foods or food groups I mentioned in the beginning. And if they are in a packaged item sold in the US, it must list so in plain language, either in a contained statement or in the ingredient list in plain language. So on the screen on the bottom, you'll see here ingredients, semolina, and in parentheses, wheat, durum flour, in parentheses, wheat. So that is one way that the company has chosen to disclose their allergens. Just in parentheses, it says wheat. And or they can use the contain statement. So underneath that, you do see the contains wheat. Either one is fine. Just because it doesn't have a contain statement doesn't mean that they are wrong or that there are no allergens in there. It may be hidden in plain language in the ingredient list. So just might take a little bit of sleuthing to find which of the top nine allergens are in there. For those that are outside the top nine, like mustard or strawberry or cantaloupe that we mentioned before, those could be hidden because those necessarily need to those don't need to be disclosed and could be hidden in spices or flavorings. But the major allergens must call them out. And then we have something called precautionary or advisory labels, which is statements like may contains or process in a facility with, and those are voluntary. So typically companies will add them if they are making things on the same line or making things close to each other or making things in the same building where it may just be hard to control things that may be airborne or things, the equipment just may be really tricky to clean and they've tried their best, but once they do their allergen testing, it still may be present in there. So they have started to include these precautionary allergen labeling. There's no guidance as to which one to use when, which one may carry higher risk if there are no thresholds. So it's very confusing. Many times, individuals who have food allergy are told by their physician to avoid things that carry precautionary allergen labels and should call companies for additional information because have been studies to show that those that have those precautionary allergen labels may contain that allergen. And so they treat it almost as if it's part of the contained statement. So these are the two U.S. laws, the FALPA, Food Allergen Labeling Consumer Protection Act, and the FAST Act, is what gives us these top 9 allergens on food labels. And I will let Carla jump back in to talk about gluten labeling because it's kind of confusing for me.
The ever popular topic about gluten labeling, because there's not a ton of there's guidance. There's the FDA gluten-free labeling rule. And basically, if something is labeled gluten free, it needs to contain less than 20 parts per million of gluten. This is completely voluntary to label something gluten free. So food manufacturers are not required to indicate all sources of gluten on the label or to indicate gluten free status. And so we're in a really interesting time right now because the FDA has, I'm going to just put a little plug for this because if we want gluten called out, now's the time to comment to the FDA. We'll put a link into the follow-up email about the ability to do that, or just check out our website. But at any rate, there is advocacy to call out gluten going on right now. Of note, wheat is a top 9 allergen, so that will be labeled. However, barley and rye are not required to be called out. So you do have to do some digging. If something has a gluten-free label, though, you do still want to use best practice of reading the ingredient label to make sure it all makes sense because sometimes mistakes happen. So use that good tool in your toolbox for label reading. If there is a gluten-free certification. This is done by, that's the little insignias. That's a third-party organization. There are many of those, and they will do a little bit of extra work. Sometimes their limits are less than 10 parts per million or less than 5. So a lot of people use that as an additional stamp of approval and safety. So at any rate, I hope that helps you understand. There's a lot more on our website about gluten-free labeling and more to come. So
Yeah. And it's not 20 parts per million of the whole package. It's like per serving, correct? So if you eat the whole box, it could still be more than 20 parts per million, or am I confusing that?
So 20 parts per million can be confusing to understand because it's not an exact unit. It's
Mm,
it's it's if you picture 1 part per million in a grain of sand, of gluten in a million pieces of sand, and picture 20 of those. So it's
hmm
a more of like a ratio. Um, yeah. So when we talk about gluten exposure in our body, so parts per million is a manufacturing term for testing gluten in a product. Gluten exposure in someone with celiac disease, it needs to be 10 milligrams. Is usually the threshold, 10 to 50 milligrams of
Got it.
gluten, which is kind of crumbs. And I'm
Yep.
happy to send a helpful link in the follow-up email about that as well.
Yeah, yeah, yes. I mean, I have so many questions, which I'm so grateful to be working with you on this to be able to share information on the gluten labeling nuances. So thank you for clarifying that for me. I can think better in milligrams versus parts per million. And then, so while we're talking about, as we move into dining outside of the home, step one, label reading, we want to make sure if we have safe food. But we want to think about all these areas of cross contact. And some of these, I wanted to start with some infographics that highlight cross contact in the home. So just thinking about your home, countertops, hands, clean, unclean dishes, utensils, cooking surfaces. This is where we can start to frame our questions for when we are dining outside of the home. So when we are dining at our aunt's house, or when we are going to a restaurant, or when our kids are going to school, when you're framing your questions for the staff or for the host or hostess, thinking about where cross contact can happen at your home, and then think about how that translates into whatever location you are planning to dine outside of the home. So, do you have separate pans or a separate cooking area to make some of these safe meals? Are your salads on this menu pre-made, or can they be made from scratch in a safe place? Do you have separate cooking utensils or, a grill mat to be used on top of that flat top to have a safe space to prepare my burger or to prepare my grilled chicken. Um, and we got this question before, so Carla, I'm gonna keep bringing you back on. Um, but one of the attendees asked ahead of time, since being diagnosed with celiac this fall, I have eaten out a few times. I struggle with knowing how far to go with cross contact and worry about touching the menu, worry about the server putting the utensils on the table, etc. What is reasonable?
Oh my goodness, this is a big question. So, at the end of the day, I want to highlight the very critical importance of our mental health and the ability to dine out comfortably and with friends and family and to enjoy ourselves and to not feel socially isolated. When we talk about food allergies versus celiac disease, ultimately, we do need to keep ourselves safe um, and ask the right questions and consider what is low risk and versus high risk. Um, and also, what are we actually ingesting? We're touching a menu. We're touching the table. Are we putting our hands in our mouths after that? In general, with celiac disease, it's when something is ingested or inhaled in the event of airborne gluten, such as flour, that can create a reaction. Um, but we need to put things into perspective. And that crumb level is where we need to think about. Um, and so we do the best we can to ask the important questions to clean the surfaces where our food is being prepared. We're going to eat with clean hands and utensils, I hope. Because you also don't want to get sick from other foodborne illness or germs. Um, a lot of people ask questions about, do I need to throw out all of my pots and pans when I get newly diagnosed? No, you do not. If things can be washed with soap and water, it removes gluten. And I know you're going to talk about sanitizer as well. Sanitizer does not remove proteins or particles. It kills germs, which are different than what we're talking about tonight.
Hmm.
So unless you're cooking or the facility is using like, you know, something that's super damaged or that could contain the food itself, washing with soap and water is efficient. That's what studies show. So, Tiffany, anything to add there?
Yeah, I would say similar in the food allergy community as well. Um, you could for food allergy, even trace amounts can cause a reaction, so it is going to be bigger than crumb exposure here. So if you are worried about a dirty menu or dirty utensils or tables, this is where we get into the planning piece of dining outside of the home. So calling the restaurant ahead of time, talking to your aunt ahead of time, um, asking them to wipe down the table, asking them if they have a QR code menu. Then you don't have to touch the menu at all. So many restaurants now have menus online. You may even be able to choose your menu item before you even walk into the restaurant, which many people do anyway. They look forward to going to dining out. They already know kind of what they want to eat. So I think it's just part of the planning process. How you show up at the table, how you get there, all starts with preparation ahead of time. And of course, you want to have clean hands when you are if you have food allergies and you are eating a meal because you want to make sure that there's nothing on your cross contact for your hands as well, especially if you end up eating with your hands. But dishwashers are a great way to remove allergens from the dishware, from the utensils, unless you visibly see something stuck on there. So if you're looking at that fork or that spoon on your table and you see something crusty on there, please get a new one. Everyone should get a new one. Not just those managing celiac disease or other adverse reactions. Like, please get a new one. But if you're not seeing that visible piece of food on there, the dishwasher likely did a really good job at getting that food off. Same thing, soap and water to remove allergens. Um, Sanitizer does not remove allergens from hands. It does not remove allergens from the table. we do recommend that the food allergy community maybe carry wipes because a wipe, like a traditional, traditional wet wipe can remove the allergen from the hand. So if you are, if there isn't, you're out and you don't have an opportunity to wash your hands, you could always, wipe your hands. So planning ahead of time. And part of the other piece, and that's my first bullet point here, is maybe looking at the time of day that you're going to the restaurant. Maybe planning to have, a dinner, a late lunch and an early dinner instead of going out at 7:30 p.m. on a Friday night because that's when the kitchen is going to be swamped. They're going to be in the weeds. It's going to be very hard. Something could get missed. Much easier when everything is swirling in back of house. So maybe choosing an off-peak time where the staff may be better equipped to manage menu modifications. We talked about notifying the restaurant ahead of time, even if you've dined out at that restaurant before, still reiterating that you have a food allergy or celiac disease when you arrive at the restaurant. You don't know if the menu has changed, if the ingredients have changed. Maybe they have a different food provider who may be giving different substitutions or different vendors providing different foods. So notifying every time you dine in a restaurant, even if it's your go-to spot. Researching the menu ahead of time. There may be some locations that are more likely or more able to make menu modifications. They may have special menus. They may allow for substitutions. Many times we hear that, someone with food allergies goes out to a restaurant and they tell them that they have a food allergy and then they hand them the gluten-free menu, which is great for those with celiac disease. But for someone getting a peanut allergy, that is not going to help with their menu planning or their decision-making process. So seeing if they have a special menu and if they do have a special menu, if it fits your dietary restrictions. And then advocate, of course, we have a series of chef cards. I know National Celiac Association, you guys have chef cards too, right, Carla?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, that explains the restrictions and can avoid lapses, not lapse in communication. And we do have them translated into multiple languages. So if you are traveling outside of the country, then you can make sure that you have your allergens translated into the native language of that country. Definitely something that you want to practice saying before you get to that country so that you can also pronounce it when you get there. And then confirm the delivery of the safe meal. So server brings it out, or maybe the bus, a runner brings your food out. Um, Always confirm the ingredients. Is this X, Y, and Z dish? Is it made without X, Y, and Z? Always, always, always ask questions. You don't want to make any assumptions there. Sometimes restaurants will put like, we'll serve it on a different plate or maybe a purple sticker, or it will only be brought out by the, main manager in the dining hall or the dining room. But still, you want to confirm the delivery of the safe meal. And then in the food allergy community, we would always make sure that we're reminding them to pack medication, always be prepared in case of an emergency and have an emergency response plan. Um, Anything else you want to add here?
I'm just going to add in real
Um,
quick that we're getting a lot of questions, so hopefully we're going to
Okay,
get some time for that. So, but I'm
sure,
holding off until we're at that point. So,
sure.
there's several that I want to address from the question box about wooden utensils and the grill, but I'll let you finish. Maybe you have one or two slides. I forgot.
Yeah, this is my last slide. The only other thing that I was going
Okay.
to say, since I kind of brought up international travel or traveling outside of the country, in addition to the chef cards, just making sure that you're doing your research ahead of time on just like general cuisine in the country and knowing what some of the common ingredients may be found in the traditional, like authentic dishes are. Some may be leaning more heavily on nuts or tree nuts, or some may be leaning more heavily on wheat or gluten. And, so just trying to get an idea of what some of the common ingredients in these traditional meals are. And then looking at where you're going to stay. Is there a hotel with a kitchen? Do you go rental property? One of my colleagues, makes a ton of meals ahead of time and then dehydrates them and packs them in her suitcase so that if they're traveling, let's say to Europe, where they land in the morning, but they can't get into the hotel until, 4 or 5 o'clock, they have a few meals that they can, as long as they have access to safe, hot or cold water, they can like make these meals and not have to be scrambling when they're not quite settled yet. So everyone has different strategies to dine out outside of the home, whether it's at your aunt's house or across the ocean. So
I love that. And I would just concur with pretty much everything you've said. It's all about planning ahead, and it's about being comfortable speaking up for yourself in the way that you're comfortable. And I'm going to talk about the crossover of allergies and celiac disease when you're talking to servers and when you're talking to restaurateurs, because it's okay if you feel comfortable saying, this is a huge question in our community about dining out. What do I say? And then a lot of people just feel comfortable saying, I have a gluten allergy. So A, they'll take it more seriously, and B, they'll understand it. In my house, so there's several of us with celiac disease, I come out and say celiac disease because for me, it's my opportunity to educate. And the more people hear the term celiac disease from my perspective, the more aware they become. But sometimes I don't. Sometimes I do say gluten allergy because I might be in a hurry. And so each situation may be different. But just acknowledging that and being okay with like the fact that no way is perfect as long as at the end of the day you receive a safe meal. So yeah.
I wanted to add into that because my son, when he was diagnosed, I know he probably wasn't comfortable at his age as a awkward teenager going through and trying to explain what celiac disease was. So he kind of went back towards saying, I have a food allergy because it did create a different response. As he's gotten older, he does now explain it. He uses it as an educational point, but it is whatever you're comfortable with. So,
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and I mean, this is your opportunity to dine outside of the home. You want to make sure that you are conveying all the information possible for those that are preparing the meal back of house or in your aunt's kitchen to be able to give you an opportunity to dine safely alongside your family and friends. And so, however you need to describe it. Um,
Yes.
yeah. So Tiffany, before we get into the questions about the grilling and the utensils, there was one way back at the beginning of the start of your presentation that you were talking about skin testing, and somebody wanted to know how often should those tests be repeated?
It's usually up to the physician. Sometimes in the younger ones, they may do it every year because there are some allergens that are more likely to be outgrown, like milk, for example, or egg, for example. Peanut, less likely to be outgrown. There are still there's a subset that may never outgrow the peanut or tree nut allergies. But so it may depend on what you're allergic to, and it may depend on, if you're a little one. Um, it could be done annually or every other year, just to see trends in the numbers.
And then another question, and Carla, I know you wanted to touch on this one. There was a question that came about grills and grilling, and is it you do if you use a grill mat, what should you do? So do you want to go ahead and then talk to that topic?
Yeah. So a lot of it is a myth that grilling kills the gluten or the allergen because grilling burns away, but it does not change the protein for how your body reacts to it. And so just you really do need the surface cleaned. So that is one myth busted. And technically you could grill it to such a high temperature that there's nothing left but char, but that's also becomes carcinogenic. So, there's that.
And
So
not
yes, you
taste
do.
doesn't taste good.
No, some people love it, but to each their own, but it's definitely
Yeah,
not
sure.
good for you. And from a gluten perspective and allergen perspective, not safe. So yes, grill mats are great. Aluminum foil can definitely do the job. Um, Trying to think what else. I think basically just a surface. So
Yeah, some sort of barrier. Yeah, I would say the same thing for food allergens as well. Like there, and we don't have time to get into all of this, but there are some individuals who can tolerate certain forms of food of their allergen, let's say in a baked form. So there are some individuals who may be allergic to egg, but can tolerate egg in the baked form. Now this is a very nuanced thing. So I don't want people to think that they can go out and like, oh, everyone with egg allergy can go out and eat a muffin. That's not the case. But there are some that can, if it's prepared a certain way. That said, no matter how much you cook the egg, it still has those egg proteins. So a scrambled egg, a fried egg, a boiled egg, it still has the cooking doesn't change the allergenicity of those egg protein. Just like you said, you're not cooking away the allergen if it's if even if you're cooking it to this like charred piece of meat, it's still present, can cause an allergen reaction.
Carl, I think the only thing I'd add about grilling is make sure that you do use the soap and water on the utensils if you have the
yes.
tongs or whatever you need. So, yeah.
We do two different. At our family gatherings, my husband is like manning my portion of the grill. And then when we travel, the first thing he does, if there's a grill, he takes all the grill plates off and he goes to the sink and he scrubs them down. So if you're going to be there for a week, you want to grill. So that's our personal strategy.
All right. Well, let's talk about then utensils. Somebody to ask about wood utensils, and could those be used in a flour mixture and washed and used to prepare a gluten-free meal?
Yeah. So when I was first diagnosed almost 25 years ago, wooden utensils and wooden parts of the kitchen were a place to avoid. Um, there actually isn't evidence to support that it is a danger area because the gluten protein is big and it's not necessarily going to get absorbed in a surface like wood. Wood is porous, but not porous enough to hold a gluten protein. Um, if the item is damaged, as you would with any other piece of equipment in your kitchen, if there's potential for food to get stuck in crevices, that's a different story. But the wood being porous enough to hold the gluten molecules and proteins is not supported by science. I would love a study for it, but we do not use caution with wood items. Tiffany, how about for allergens?
I don't know the answer to that question. I would probably err on the side of caution just to be safe,
Yeah.
um, because those molecules for the egg and even trace amounts, like, as we talked about before, are going to be causing a reaction. And there are so many different types of utensils out there now that it's not like you could just stick with the stainless steel. You could stick with
Yeah.
whichever whatever your preference is, or have one set of wooden ones that, are for allergen prep and one for the safe prep, and you could just kind of mark them with a marker on the end. Um,
Yeah.
to kind of keep them at home if you prefer to do your baking with a wooden spoon.
Yeah. And when in doubt, like go with what you're more comfortable with. If it's
Yeah,
going to cause you anxiety, then don't do it. Because
right.
ultimately, again, I'm going to mention mental health is really, really critical to physical health and well-being. So
Yep, agreed.
Next questions, and I'm going to lump a couple together because Tiffany, you talked about this about how to call ahead to the restaurant and how to speak with them. Are there certain questions there that you should ask and you think you should get an answer to? One question that came in was talking about, do you ask the restaurant if their pasta is cooked in a dedicated pot or not? I mean, is that something that you find that the restaurant can provide to you, or that your server, if you're asking the server a question, can they provide it to you, or are you still saying, call ahead and make sure everything's that you get the right answer before you go?
I would ask it twice. I've worked as a hostess at a restaurant. Sometimes the hostess is very disconnected from what's happening in the kitchen. For regular questions at a restaurant that offers a gluten-free menu, yes, they may be well equipped to answer those questions because this, you know, Italian restaurant is known for having like the best gluten-free pasta in town, and like it may be known how they prepare it in back of house. So yeah, it depends on the location. It depends on what you're asking about. If you're talking about how it's boiled versus um, are menu modifications available, and when is a slower time in the restaurant to come to dine out at your restaurant. um, do you have if I came into your restaurant, am I able to talk to the chef when I sit down? um, so I think it depends, but I would always confirm. You don't want to assume that what the hostess told you 2 weeks ago when you were making the reservation, or even a month before when you were making the reservation, that everything is the same, are the same. I would always confirm when you get there.
That's good advice. Yeah. So, for the conversation's great. I want to limit just to two more questions for the be respectful of everyone's time. This one, I really enjoyed this question because, like I said, I lived with a teenager who often visited Chipotle, and somebody did ask us. They said, my 17-year-old is eating out at Chipotle daily. I insisted he stop and only do it on the weekends, but he won't listen to me. I'm worried about cross-contamination and what it might be doing. Should I be worried? What can I say to him? I'm just curious as to what the responses would be to that because I had the same thing in my house.
Do you want me to start or
Yeah,
do you want to go
you
ahead?
can start. Yeah, yeah, sure.
From a celiac perspective, I think that, and also a parent of a child with celiac disease, there's lots of ways you could handle this. One, you also have to know that your child, as a teenager, is going to make their choices and their mistakes, and there's not a lot that you can control. So, at some point, if they've been properly educated, you have to do the best that you can, help them out to learn from mistakes as well. Also, if you're recognizing signs and symptoms of gluten exposure and perhaps talking about it with the healthcare provider, how do we monitor levels of vitamin and minerals for their blood work? Do we need to take that more frequently? Checking antibody levels. So if you're really concerned that he's eating out, or he or she are eating out at a restaurant that might not be safe, um, maybe take it to that level, but also, you can do some calling on the back end, go there for several days in a row and just see about their cross contact prevention strategies, see if it really even is a problem, because it might not. There are a lot of places that might be just doing it right and he feels confident. And so it might be okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to think of the line setup here. So, when at what point is the tortilla introduced into making this? Obviously, he's opting out of that, maybe doing a rice bowl. But if there are designated utensils and they're just, filling up along the way, then like Carla said, it might be perfectly safe. Um, that's one of the differences between a food allergy and celiac disease is if there was cross contact and it happened, in their bowl, or they would know pretty quickly. Food allergy reactions typically happen immediately or up to 2 hours after. So they would know um, if there was any instances of cross contact when dining out. But we're talking about the similarities and we're talking about some of the differences here. And we have when we have our conferences. One of them was in DC, and it was really close to a Chipotle, and it was very busy with, with the food allergy community because they did feel safe dining out there. Obviously, it depends on the allergens that you're avoiding, but it's nice to hear that your son does feel comfortable dining outside of the home. That can be a hurdle in and of itself. Even wanting to dine outside of the home. We were talking about this psychosocial aspect of food allergies, this burden of food allergies, and there may be some that are even too scared to dine outside of the home. So there's this silver lining here is that he feels comfortable.
Chris, what would you do? What did you do?
I let him outside the home. I didn't want, I said, go ahead and do that. And, I thought it was a good growing experience for him. He was leaving at that age, he was leaving for college the next year. And I knew I wasn't going to be with him the whole time. I knew, he was going to have to make his own decisions and find out what the consequences may or may not be. And so, yeah, that's, I let him do that. I made sure that he understood the risks that were there. But at that point in time, I trusted that he had had celiac disease by that time for 5 years. So I trusted that he had the right judgment to do what he did that was best for him. So, yeah.
I was going to chime in too. So my son growing up too was a teenager, just like, what Chris had dealt with his son all the time going out and eat. And I asked him one time, I said, I'm worried, I'm worried. Are you asking the right questions? And he told me that that social aspect of being out with his friends outweighed that slight risk. And knowing that in the back of his head that he could, but he would make sure that he was asking more questions and making sure that, everything was in place when he was ordering.
Real quick, a question came in, and I know we were talking. I said we were going to do one more or two more. I have this one, but we talked about grills. Somebody asked about pizza stones, and if it
Oh,
previously used for wheat pizza and thoroughly cleaned, would it be good? Also, kind of cast iron cookware, so anything like that, if cleaned properly.
so I don't know about pizza stones, but yeah, that type of material is tougher. I think cast iron, you definitely need a dedicated cast iron dish. It holds way too much seasoning. And the seasoning piece of a pizza stone as well. I would definitely avoid that, whether there's evidence or not, personally. But
We always,
cast iron for sure, definitely avoid.
yeah, we always had two stones. We had the gluten-free one, and then if we decided to do something else, we had another one.
I'm going to end on a question that's kind of a loaded question, so I apologize. I just thought it was a good question. So, how much do you trust the menu when it says there's a food allergy on it?
Like if the menu is trying to be transparent and says contains peanuts, like
Yeah,
in the dish.
yeah.
Um, if the menu is indicating items that it contains, then I think you can trust it very, they're not going to put that it contains peanuts if it's a, chicken parmesan contains peanuts. Like they're going to be very deliberate when they're calling out the things that are in that dish. When the menu lends itself to highlighting things that are free from, oh, this is dairy free, this is gluten free, this is vegan, this, all, all the all the flags that menus typically use. I would caution against that and just continue to ask questions. It may be a good starting point, like, oh, this is a vegan rice bowl. Okay, what are some of the ingredients that are in here? Is it truly egg free, dairy free, shellfish free, not peanut free? That would be fine in a vegan bowl. But when it starts to list free from, then I almost want to ask more questions. When we're working with restaurants, we try to encourage them if they are containing some top nine allergens that may not be so obvious, to include it in the menu name. So pecan crusted salmon, so that it calls it out in the name, or to offer description. So it's not just, roasted salmon. It's roasted salmon coated with crushed pecans and, wheat flour. So, or panko breadcrumbs or something. So it can call out some of these common allergens on the menu without having to go through all of these different identifiers.
Yeah. And for gluten-free menus, they vary so much. You'll have a gluten-free menu with a disclaimer at the bottom, not safe for celiac. So don't eat here. So then or not, or you're reading reviews on one of the apps, restaurant apps, you can call ahead and say, I've read some great reviews about your restaurant, and they're like, yay, okay, another customer. Can you walk me through what you do? Because I need to eat gluten-free for medical reasons. I'm not eating it because for whatever reason I need to eat for medical reasons. Can you tell me how you prepare the food, or what are the ingredients in this particular dish? I just have a couple more questions about how it's prepared.
And that's such a good point because the menu identifiers don't necessarily flag for how it's prepared. It could be a vegetarian fried item, or it could be a dairy-free a fried item. But if it's fried in the same oil that mozzarella sticks are fried in, then there could be cross contact just from the fryer. So even if it is, you know, fried zucchini sticks, there could be cross contact just in the fryer. So even if the menu identifiers are right, you still want to ask questions about preparation.
Well, Tiffany, Carla, thank you so much. I mean, we ran over a little bit, but these are really good questions. People had a lot of feedback. This is something, like I said, it's a hot topic for people who are not only newly diagnosed or newly find out that they have an allergy, but as they continue to grow with their throughout what's offered out there for them and how they adjust to their condition and their journey. So thank you both for being on here and addressing these questions. And for everyone who came and participated, thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen real quick again. We do have a couple of things coming up here as an organization that I did want to share with you. Maybe there we go. So we have a Raising Our Celiac Kids. Oh, I went to the wrong page. I'm sorry, everybody. Let me go back one. There we go. We have a Raising Our Celiac Kids, which is rock. We have a taco and trivia night next Monday at 6:30 Eastern Time. These are for elementary kids, ages K through 5. We're building our favorite tacos, quesadillas, burrito bowls. These kids like to hang out with each other, and they just like to just talk to each other and be around kids who are going through what they're going through as well. And then we have our next All Things Celiac webinar with Harvard Medical School Celiac Education and Research Program. That is on March 18th at 1 o'clock. That will be on Zoom. Again, uncovering the base of the celiac iceberg from case findings to universal screening. So registration for both these events can be found on our website at nationalceliac.org/NCA-events. So registration's open now for both of those. Thank you again to Pamela's Products for their sponsorship of tonight's webinar. Please continue to visit NCA's website and our social media accounts for updates and announcements about future programs and presentations focusing on mental wellness, celiac disease, food allergies, etc. For Tiffany, Carla, myself, and the rest of the team here at the National Celiac Association, we thank you for attending tonight's event. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you.